17104.com. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice. Tell me not, in lonesome numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul's not dead that slumbers, and it's not all what it seems. Life is earth. Life is real, and the grave is not as gold. Dust thy art and dust returneth, was not spoken of the soul. Brothers and sisters, this is Richard James, and thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Beautiful day in the neighborhood. Every day is a beautiful day that we live. I've been following in the national news whole movement of many states, right-wing extremists trying to do away with teaching African and African American studies and educating the public, people, Blacks, Asians, whites, about the history of our people, of African American people. And just remember one thing, when you're talking about African and African American studies or Asian studies or what have you, you're talking about the history of mankind. And you're including an important element in our history that's been excluded. You see, the kind of education that has been thrust on our people, and I'm not just going to say Black people, but all people, has been void of information on the participation of people of color, particularly African Americans, and also Asians and other groups, in the whole journey called life, in the world community. It's almost as if the only people that exist were whites, and that every accomplishment that was made was done by whites. And let me be very clear, members of the white race have made some very great accomplishments. You can't take it away from them. You can't take away the Roman Empire. Magnificent. You can't take away the exploits of people like Napoleon, for example. You can't take away the explorers, Ferdinand Magellan, Marco de Soto, Christopher Columbus. These men were great men, and they contributed much to civilization. There's no question about that. We take our hats off. But what about Mansa Musa? Mansa Musa, emperor, head of the Mandingo people of Mali, calculated by scientists as being the richest man that ever lived, a Black man. You can't forget about people like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, an African American, a man of African descent, whose philosophy of nonviolence and love spread throughout the world. You just can't tell a correct picture, show a correct picture of the history of mankind and exclude extremely important passages and individuals. We have always had some racism systemic racism in this country and in our government. That's not to say that we didn't have some positive elements, and we still have some positive elements in government. I personally favor democracy over an oligarchy, over a communist government. I favor free enterprise and the ability of individuals to develop an income for themselves and as business and an honest business, a day-to-day business, as opposed to a dictatorial communist regime. I just do. Even though the commune means people. In other words, everything is run by the government, supposedly for the people. But that's not how it's worked out. Within the context of this system, you've had people like Stalin, you've had Marxists who have killed and slaughtered millions of people. That's a fact. On the flip side, we also have had some Christians to do some of the kinds of things. So a pure democracy means of the people, by the people, and for the people, with individuals participating in that form of government, is what I personally consider ideal. Now we're going to break down today leadership about a gentleman we refer to as Malcolm X, Menelik El-Shabazz, a member of this Shabazz tribe. This is a man, and he wasn't the only one, that was assassinated over 50 years ago, back in 1965. A great man, a brilliant man. And this, I have a video that I show you. Not my video, but we're going to use this video. We want you to check it out. That we show you the true history of Menelik El-Shabazz. Right now, the children of Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz are suing the police department in New York, the government, over the assassination and their participation in the assassination of Malcolm X. New evidence has come forth, that's damning evidence, to show this man. And the interesting thing about it is that both Malcolm X, who in the latter part of his life preached human rights, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King moved from civil rights to human rights also, and peace, were both assassinated. And the president that also wanted peace and wanted people treated fairly, it was his agenda, it was John Kennedy. John Kennedy was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. We have a history of killing people of goodwill. People who preach love wind up dead. Mahatma Gandhi, Indian, started his journey in South Africa, fighting against apartheid, discrimination against people of color, moving on to his home in India, the second largest country in the world, was also assassinated. And quite often, if you look at these people, both Malcolm and Gandhi were assassinated at the hands of someone who was a member of their own race. It's questionable Dr. King's situation as to whether or not that is the case. I think that might not be exactly the case. But getting back to Malcolm X, there's been a lot of misinformation, distorted information about his history, about his philosophy, about his growth. When he started out from being a separatist and then realizing that all people are the same. We're all equal in God's sight. And began to perpetuate through his organization of African American Unity a philosophy that included unity and working together. He was very critical of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He insisted that Black people should defend themselves, and that is legal. Makes a whole lot of sense. But he was not advocating violent overthrow of the government. Not in any stretch of the imagination. That was not his intent. But with this video, this one of the best that I've seen. It clarifies step by step, taking you through in a historical context, the things that Malcolm went through. And now his children, who are mature adults and have developed emotionally and intellectually in their own right, are leading the charge to bring about change. In fact, there was a series on Malcolm X exposing who actually killed Malcolm X. Okay, let's take a look at the video, and at the end of the show, we'll take a look back and see what we can find.
The magnificent life of Imam Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, may Allah be pleased with him, is rightfully memorialized as the epic triumph of a man who ascended victoriously from the concrete jungles of America's ghettos, unfettered by the crushing weight of its systematic inequity towards Black men and women who have been cordoned off from mainstream society by seemingly insurmountable barriers that had for so long served as an open cage designed to imprison their bodies, minds, and spirits. His candor, courage, and charisma serve as a golden standard by which the index of human greatness and its latent capacity for growth, transformation, and elevation may be measured. Despite having lived for little over 39 years, his tremendous legacy continues to inspire the oppressed communities of the world. Malcolm's mesmerizing words still resonate deeply within the hearts and minds of millions of men and women living in regions as far off as India, Palestine, China, Sudan, and countless nations across the Earth's vast continents. This film is a culmination of years of study, contemplation, and steady research into Malcolm's most intimate and personal experiences, encounters, and thoughts, many of which have yet to be conveyed faithfully onto a bright new generation whose aim, as it appears to be, is to continue championing the cause of the oppressed and dispossessed, both at home and abroad. Malcolm's full potential has long been the subject of profound conversations, given the fact that he died so early in his career. Yet he left behind him a blueprint for a magnificent future in which the world's most disadvantaged and dispossessed communities could one day be brought together under the united banner of brotherhood in the hopes of restoring some semblance of justice and balance in this world. This film is only but a single page among many unfolding chapters in Malcolm's exemplary life, and is intended to convey but one measure of light from a vast array of hidden insights that have for so long been overshadowed in obscurity, marginalized by mainstream media outlets, and suppressed by those who bitterly oppose Malcolm's message, undermining everything that he stood for, both in flesh and in spirit. We dedicate this film to the undying legacy of Brother Malcolm, our Imam Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. The autobiography of Malcolm X is a 20th century literary classic which has inspired several films, books, artists, and documentaries. However, despite its title, the book itself was not written entirely by Malcolm. In fact, it was co-authored, then edited and finalized by Alex Haley, the celebrated author of Kunta Kinte and an established authority within the world of journalism, who had written articles on Malcolm and became fascinated with investigating and conveying his story. Alex Haley later revealed that Malcolm had initially been very hesitant about publishing an autobiography, which prompted Haley to persist with the idea until Malcolm succumbed to the proposal, and the two thus began to work together towards the biography in the year 1962. From the outset of their collaboration, Malcolm had insisted that the biography should be a tribute to his teacher and guide, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, whom he intended to dedicate the book to as a testament to the transformative influence that the Nation of Islam had on his life. It was also a gesture of loyalty by which Malcolm had hoped to endear himself to Elijah Muhammad and to earn the grace of his beloved mentor. According to Alex Haley, the initial drafts were very difficult to format, given the fact that Malcolm's literary style was still deeply anchored in the political speeches he had been so used to preparing for his live audiences. Alex Haley struggled to orient and redirect Malcolm towards the literary style that would be more introspective, intimate, and insightful for a book that was meant to convey Malcolm's personal story and not that of America's policies or that of the Nation of Islam. The breakthrough moment arrived when Alex Haley began questioning Malcolm X about his mother, Louise Helen Norton Little, and the conditions in which he and his siblings were living under during the period in which she was sectioned in a psychiatric hospital following her husband's brutal murder. It was only then that Malcolm X lowered his guard and finally broke loose from his formulaic and academic discourse, sinking deeply into his earliest memories to uncover his childhood traumas. It was at this point that the autobiography of Malcolm X truly began to develop. Over the course of approximately a year and a half, Malcolm X and Alex Haley would continue to correspond and collaborate, meeting one another in cafes or in Alex's office in order to transcribe Malcolm's handwritten notes as the manuscript was slowly being refined. However, the project took several unexpected turns following Malcolm's assassination on February 21, 1965, resulting in Alex Haley having to complete and finalize the book by himself, shortly after which he was informed that his contract with the publishing firm Doubleday was cancelled, as the company had decided to sever all ties to the project soon after Malcolm's assassination, fearing reprisals as the autobiography was considered far too controversial and the circumstances surrounding Malcolm's assassination only added to that controversy. Though it was unknown to Malcolm at the time, from the very beginning there were some indications that the project itself may have been a covert operation aimed at further damaging the Nation of Islam and its leadership. It was in fact reported that Alex Haley was allegedly entangled with the FBI in as early as 1962, when a fellow journalist named Alfred Bolk collaborated with Haley to co-author an article for the Saturday Evening Post, which was published a year later in 1963. The article was entitled The Black Merchants of Hate, and was a hit piece intended to discredit and distort the image and mission of the Nation of Islam. It later transpired that Alfred Bulk had struck a secret agreement with the FBI in order to gain access to classified and compromising information about the Nation of Islam that would enable the two journalists to castigate and marginalize the black Muslims and their progress within the mainstream civil rights community. In return for this exchange of information, the FBI would exploit the negative media coverage and controversy in which the Nation of Islam would then be embroiled in following the publication of this article, so as to serve as further evidence for its ongoing investigation against the nation's leadership. It has also been reported that Alex Haley exploited this information, which was acquired through the FBI from his colleague Alfred Bulk, to serve as a template and an underlying current throughout certain passages in the autobiography of Malcolm X. The final revision was eventually published. However, Alex Haley's motives appeared unclear to many of Malcolm's close associates, as details surfaced concerning Haley's identity as a committed Republican and an integrationist who despised the Nation of Islam, its mission, and its message. Haley also rewrote many of Malcolm's passages without notifying him during the time in which the two men were meeting and working alongside one another. Following Malcolm's assassination, Haley would remove 3 entire chapters from the book altogether. Although Haley's version of Malcolm's autobiography is still the most popular and recognizable piece of literature on Malcolm's life, there are many underlying concerns regarding its veracity and authenticity. Thus, the autobiography never completely conveys Malcolm's innermost passion to establish justice and equity in America, nor does it remain faithful to his raw opinions on certain topics, which Haley judged to be far too controversial for print. However, by piecing together the loose ends of what has been gathered from Malcolm's personal journal entries and through written correspondences with his closest friends, we hope to convey a clearer representation and a more insightful perspective into Malcolm's development as he traveled the world and experienced new realities. By referencing and piecing together many studies, research papers, books, and classified documents, including Malcolm's handwritten notes and travel journals, all of which have finally been brought forth into the public domain, we thereby intend to explore many of the unanswered questions to themes and subjects that have fascinated millions of people since Malcolm's untimely departure in 1965. We shall be exploring themes ranging from Malcolm's quiet observations, personal opinions, and moving encounters while he was traveling throughout the Middle East, as well as questions pertaining to the more pressing subject of Malcolm's intellectual, spiritual, and strategic objectives during the final phase of his life. To attain this objective, we shall rely heavily on archived copies of Malcolm's personal journal, which he took with him on his final world tour in 1964, and had intended to compile and publish independently upon his return to the United States. Malcolm's travel journal is saturated with deep introspective thoughts and profound expressions of his new worldview as a Sunni Muslim and as an advocate for global human rights. These intimate records will provide a rare insight into Malcolm's spirit as conveyed through his own words. Malcolm also sketched out preliminary plans of what he had hoped of achieving through his new established organizations, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated and the Organization of African American Unity. With plans of publishing his self-authored book, Malcolm had hoped to support his family financially, while also delivering a series of presentation lectures to his community, giving them a much-needed insight into what was happening in other parts of the world. Malcolm never got the opportunity to complete his work, and the loose pages replete with handwritten notes were left unattended alongside a pile of Malcolm's possessions, photographs, and other memorabilia that were discovered in a storage bin somewhere in Florida, waiting to be sold at a regular auction in San Francisco. Fortunately, Malcolm's family was able to rescue these priceless relics just in time with the help of an attorney. Today, a significant portion of these historic items are preserved and guarded in Harlem's Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where transcripts of his letters, notes, and journals can still be accessed by scholars, historians, and researchers. Unbeknown to many, Malcolm's trip to Mecca in 1964 was not his first visit to the Holy Land, nor was it his first trip outside of the United States. In fact, Malcolm had previously traveled to the Middle East and across Africa in as early as 1959, acting as an ambassador of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. Malcolm's first international expedition was in July 1959, when he had obtained a passport issued under the name of Malik al-Shabazz. The young minister traveled across the Middle East and Africa, visiting Nigeria, Ghana, Sudan, Egypt, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Upon his return to the United States, Malcolm X published details of his trip in the Pittsburgh Courier, outlining his mission and the positive reception which he had received both in Africa and in the Middle East as a representative and figurehead for the Nation of Islam. In the same year, the Nation of Islam's leader, Elijah Muhammad, would personally visit Cairo before going to Mecca, where he performed the minor pilgrimage, Umrah, with the permission of the Saudi establishment, thereby indicating that his organization had the implicit approval of leading Muslim authorities in both Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Malcolm X's 1959 tour of the Middle East and Africa had been well orchestrated and served as a successful marketing strategy designed to elevate and project the Nation of Islam's reputation both at home and abroad, branding it as a legitimate Islamic entity that was being widely recognized and applauded for its work. While in Mecca, it has been reported that Malcolm X had the opportunity to perform the Hajj pilgrimage before Elijah Muhammad. However, Malcolm X forfeited and rejected the offer to perform the pilgrimage in deference and out of consideration for his mentor, who would have only had such an opportunity following Malcolm's return to the United States. Nevertheless, Minister Malcolm's direct exposure and interaction with societies, organizations, and key influential people across the Middle East and in Africa enabled him to establish contacts and build bridges with several revolutionary factions and movements of his time. Among all the experiences he later recounts from his tour in 1959, Malcolm X was by far most impressed with his
felt at heaven and at home there.
Of all the countries through which Malcolm X had been on his first world tour, Sudan stood out as the most fascinating and captivating place on earth, and he remembered Sudan as the place that had left the greatest impression on him with regards to piety and culture. As a matter of fact, it was during his first visit to the Sudan that his ideas about Islam were first being challenged, leaving a long-lasting impression in the heart and mind of the 34-year-old minister. The ancient Nubian civilization and its cultural legacy had long captivated the imagination of the Nation of Islam, occupying a venerated place in the mythology and worldview espoused by Elijah Muhammad, who first introduced this narrative to the African American community through his famous book entitled Message to the Black Man in America, in which the author declares that the tribe of Shabazz had originally appeared on Earth some 60 trillion years ago and had settled in the Nile Valley. Elijah Muhammad then informs his readership that the tribe of Shabazz were an Afro-Asiatic people who had constructed great pyramids in ancient times. The said descendants of these mighty people were supposedly enslaved and transported to the Americas, where they eventually came to be known as the Lost Tribe of Shabazz. Malcolm X and several other leading figures within the Nation of Islam then began to openly identify themselves as members of the Shabazz clan, which is where his adopted surname was derived from. It was not surprising for Malcolm X to have developed such a fascination with the Sudan, considering the centrality of Nubia within Elijah Muhammad's mythology and that of other Afrocentric movements of the era. Cult leaders such as Dr. Malachi Z. York had famously declared himself a descendant of As-Sayyid Abdul Rahman al-Mahdi, who was one of Sudan's leading religious and political figures during the Anglo-Egyptian era of Sudan between 1898 and 1955.
You are Sudanese, you are Nubians, you're not Africans. Africans are pagans. Now, you are Sudanese, you have a dress code, it is passed down from heaven to you.
Following in the footsteps of Elijah Muhammad, Dr. York went on to establish his own cult, which he named the Nubians. Ever since then, a number of books, films and organizations have arisen bearing variations of the word Nubia. In fact, many artists of the era and those who followed in their footsteps have incorporated Nubian instruments, subtle terminologies, and iconography into their songs, films, and publications. The deep influence of Nubian symbolism and representation is still faintly detectable in contemporary African American artistic expression. Prior to his arrival in the Sudan, Malcolm X had already been in close correspondence with Malik Badri, a 27-year-old Sudanese student who at the time was actively pursuing advanced studies in psychology. Malik Badri was Malcolm's local guide in the Sudan. The pair met outside a Grand Hotel in Khartoum before going on a tour of the historic sites and cultural landmarks in Omdurman and Khartoum. Malcolm's advanced knowledge of Nubian culture and history had quite impressed Malik Badri, who was astounded by Malcolm's special interest in the life and legacy of Muhammad al-Mahdi, in regards to whom Malcolm spoke with great enthusiasm and admiration. Muhammad al-Mahdi was the Nubian leader who launched a rebellion against Sudan Turco-Egyptian rulers and defeated the British to create the Mahdist state, Mahdiya, which encompassed the regions between the Red Sea to Darfur between 1885 to 1899. However, when he visited Khartoum, Malcolm X expressed his disapproval with the presence of Caucasians there, informing Malik Badri of his discomfort with the false propaganda being promoted as fact by Caucasians back in America, who had insisted that the continent of Africa and its peoples were without any culture or civilization, prompting Malcolm to bring a journal and a camera to the Sudan in order to gather intelligence and to document his findings pertaining to the real history and the legacy of ancient artifacts and monuments still present in Nubia. Malcolm was hoping to return back to America with first-hand experience and evidence with which to dispel the misconceptions about Africa and to educate his people about the glorious civilizations that had once flourished on the continent. Malcolm X was a great proponent and student of history. He considered knowledge of the past to be a very critical and powerful means by which to empower people who had for so long been deprived and denied knowledge of their true selves. Malcolm X's interest in the landscape and culture of Sudan was evident in the large number of photographs he took and the film footage he recorded during his stay there. However, Malcolm X's ideology and worldview at the time had been entirely shaped by Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. This was evident to his local guide, Malik Badri, who was very much aware of these theological divergences between Sunni Islam and the theology of the Nation of Islam. Although Malcolm X's Sudanese company was concerned with the interpretation of Islam being propagated by Malcolm and that of the nation itself, the young man did not instigate any debates or overtly challenge Malcolm about his beliefs. Instead, he subtly conveyed the core Islamic tenets of Tawheed, that is the absolute unity of God, which is central to Islamic theology. Malik would share photographs of some of the children he had been teaching basic Islamic lessons to, all the while explaining these fundamental theological concepts to Malcolm as they looked at the photographs together. Despite his youth and inexperience, Malik was very sensible and considerate in his approach. Rather than cut at the roots of what he believed to be a heretical manifestation of Islam, Malik decided instead to embed a few seeds of contemplation into Malcolm's fertile and inquisitive mind, which in time would grow and blossom. It was these seeds that in fact took root and eventually blossomed in the heart and mind of Malcolm X 5 years later, when he officially severed ties with the Nation of Islam and embraced Sunni Islam. The sagacity and grace experienced by Malcolm in his interaction with Malik Badri in 1959 left an indelible mark of respect and admiration in Malcolm's memory, as he would later continue to praise the people of Sudan for their loving kindness, genuine piety, and their unwavering solidarity with the plight of African Americans. His travel diaries and letters are replete with hearty references to the Sudanese and in what he referred to as their quiet confidence. Malcolm X even makes an entry in his journal stating that he would never cease to be impressed by the Sudanese. Malcolm's international assignment and journey through the Middle East and Africa in 1959 was primarily orchestrated in order to establish and publicize the Nation of Islam's credibility as a real Muslim organization that was affiliated with leading Islamic organizations across the world. Yet despite the fact that several Sunni organizations and public figures within the United States were fully aware of the Nation of Islam's heterodox theology and beliefs, very few people condemned them publicly or challenged them in regards to their unorthodox statements and racial theories. At that time, the only known orthodox Sunni Muslim to openly challenge Elijah Muhammad and his Nation of Islam was Yahya Hayari. He was another young Sudanese man who was in the United States in pursuit of advanced studies at the University of Pennsylvania. According to records, Yahya maintained direct correspondence with Malcolm X during his time within the Nation of Islam. It was in 1962 that Yahya Hayari authored a sharp refutation of Elijah Muhammad. The brazen denunciation of Elijah Muhammad was published by the Pittsburgh Courier, prompting Malcolm X to take on the challenge in defense of his mentor's honor. Malcolm X personally responded to Hayari in a private letter before publicly chastising him via the same newspaper publication, the Pittsburgh Courier, wherein Malcolm criticized Yahya Hayari for his colonially minded outlook on race relations, before criticizing him for having adopted the American mentality instead of maintaining his own cultural identity. Though well-intentioned, Yahya's public and confrontative approach was apparently ineffective, as it had only fueled debate and hostility between himself and Malcolm X, unlike the more genteel and sagacious approach that Malik Badri had applied with Malcolm back in the Sudan. Although we do not know to what extent Yahya Hayari's open challenge had influenced Malcolm to look into Sunni theology, Hayari was certainly not going to be the last Sudanese student who would cross paths with Malcolm X in such a brazen and confrontative manner. Whether it was the kind and considerate approach of Malik Badri or the bold and challenging tone of Yahya Hayari, Malcolm would maintain regular correspondence with Sudanese students who would inevitably express their concerns to him regarding his theology and the message he was preaching on behalf of the Nation of Islam. In the same year in which Yahya Hayari openly challenged Elijah Muhammad's teachings, yet another Sudanese student entered into the fray and would soon cross paths with Malcolm X. Though this time the encounter would be far more personal and unabashedly critical. It would seem as if with each subsequent encounter, Malcolm's Sudanese counterparts were becoming less and less subtle with their concerns and grievances. Malcolm's third encounter with a Sudanese student was when he met Ahmed Siddiq Osman, a native of Argin, which is a Nubian village situated approximately 20 kilometers south of Abu Simbel. Ahmed Osman was a prodigious and gifted student who drew the attention of key American institutions when he was selected to represent the Sudan in the New York Tribune's World Youth Forum, before attending the University of Khartoum and securing scholarships to pursue advanced studies in America at the universities of Brandeis and Dartmouth. Ahmed finally settled with the offer of Dartmouth College on the condition that he would spend all his vacations with an American family as part of the program. Ahmed Siddiq Osman arrived in the United States in the autumn of 1962, aged approximately 20 years old. The young scholar was well informed about the plight of African people across the world, and more so in America. He was also aware of the teachings of the Nation of Islam prior to meeting with Malcolm X in person. Ahmed's first direct encounter with Malcolm X was on a Sunday afternoon in July 1963, where he and a friend were walking near Muhammad's Temple No. 7 in Harlem, where Malcolm served as a minister and used to deliver public lectures to large audiences. It so happened that Malcolm was engaged in delivering a 4-hour lecture to approximately 500 congregants, while Ahmed and his friend passed by the venue and decided to enter out of curiosity. Ahmed joined the audience and was captivated by Malcolm's charisma and intelligence. However, towards the end of the lecture, Ahmed raised his hand and challenged Malcolm X in regards to his radical racial theories, supposedly based on the teachings of the Quran. Having recognized Ahmed to be yet another Sudanese student, Malcolm X reassured the crowd and encouraged the young questioner to continue with his line of inquiry, after informing him that he too had studied the history of the African continent and its ancient civilizations, which included those of the mighty empires that arose within the Nile Valley, including the Nubian and Cushitic empires, the Aksumite Empire, and the great Sudanic empires. In fact, Malcolm even recounted his visit to the University of Omdurman and Afhad College, which was Sudan's first university for women. Malcolm recounted how he drew inspiration and had great admiration for the Sudanese youth, whose support for fellow African nations striving for independence from the colonial powers would be manifest through student-led protests and open denunciation of the racist apartheid system which was being practiced in South Africa, while decrying the brutality of the racist policies in Congo that had resulted in the brutal assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Malcolm's words resonated deeply with Ahmed Siddiq Osman, who was himself a high school student during the first wave of African decolonization and was an active participant in those demonstrations through the streets of Khartoum. However, Ahmed did not forego his rare opportunity to correct Malcolm X before the congregation, as he wanted to challenge the idea that the Quran endorsed the notion of the white race or any other race being referred to as the devil. Malcolm cheerfully accepted Ahmed's challenge and proceeded to read the following verse from a copy of an English translation which he had at hand.
يوم ينفخ في الصور ونحشر المجرمين يومئذ زرقا يتخافتون.
Malcolm X had always been taught by his mentors in the Nation of Islam that this verse was in specific reference to the European race. Ahmed, a native Arabic speaker, boldly challenged Malcolm's interpretation of the word Zurqa, insisting that it was not meant to be interpreted with the distorted meaning by which the Nation of Islam were conveying to the people. Malcolm X was so impressed by Ahmed Osman's audacity and courage before the unsettled audience of almost 500 people, but he was not intimidated by the challenge and signaled to the audience to calm down and allow Ahmed to continue with his questioning. Though the young Sudanese student was not convinced with the racist theology of Malcolm X, he was nevertheless impressed by the remarkable grace with which Malcolm articulated his thoughts while maintaining his composure. Following the encounter, Malcolm X exchanged correspondence details with Ahmed Osman, and the two became friends from that day onwards. They would maintain contact and confide in one another for the rest of Malcolm's life. Ahmed Siddiq Osman is even referenced in the autobiography of Malcolm X and was later solicited by Spike Lee for the role of lead consultant in the film. However, due to the unexpected invasion of Kuwait at the time, Ahmed Osman was not accessible as he was in the process of leaving Kuwait for Saudi Arabia. He also lost many of the personal letters and correspondences that had been left in his home during the war. Sadly, his insights, archives, and experiences with Malcolm X never made it into the movie. As the two men continued to exchange thoughts and ideas by mail, Osman would send literature from the Islamic Center of Geneva, which was established in 1961 by Saeed Ramadan, the son-in-law of Hassan al-Banna, who was the ideological founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. Ahmed Osman continued to send such literature to Malcolm, encouraging him to learn more about true Islam. Malcolm was very impressed by the ideas and principles he was studying through these publications and would request more books and pamphlets. While on his travels, Malcolm would consult Ahmed Osman about the Arabic verses in the Quran, for which he sought clearer insights from a native speaker of the language. In one such correspondence, dated November 13, 1963, Malcolm requested Ahmed's help in translating 2 Arabic verses into English, one of which was the same verse he had quoted as evidence for the white man being the devil when Ahmed Osman had challenged him in front of his congregation. It had long been rumored that senior members from within the Nation of Islam were growing dissatisfied of Malcolm's ambitious streak, his growing popularity, and his influence within the organization. Some had even feared that Malcolm X was strategically positioning himself to overshadow and supersede their elderly and less charismatic leader, Elijah Muhammad, who was affectionately referred to by older members of the nation as the Little Lamb, following his release from prison in 1942. Elijah Muhammad was widely characterized as the meek and mild-mannered mentor who had successfully tamed the raging lion that was stirring furiously within the spirit of Malcolm X, whose prison nickname was Satan. However, as Malcolm X became more and more prominent within the organization, it would appear that some of its members were fearful that the lion may eventually grow to devour the lamb. The tension between Malcolm X and his mentor was further accentuated when talk of Elijah Muhammad's gross indiscretions with teenage secretaries, with whom he had fathered many illegitimate children, began to circulate within the organization. Malcolm X was at first in denial, but soon realized that the allegations were substantiated with sound evidence when Elijah Muhammad's own son, Warith Deen Muhammad, informed Malcolm X of what he had personally witnessed in his father's presence and exposed inside information that only he was privy to. Upon receiving this confirmation, Malcolm X was torn and confused, but he decided not to go public with the information at that time, fearing violent reprisals from leading members of the organization's military unit, the Fruit of Islam, whom he had personally trained to protect the honor of Elijah Muhammad at any cost. In the weeks and months to follow, Malcolm X's presence within the Nation of Islam was marginalized and undermined. He was banned from participating in certain activities and became the subject of confidential meetings and communiques. However, the cataclysmic event that would destroy Malcolm's relationship with the Nation of Islam forever came immediately following an interview that Malcolm had given to the press shortly after the brutal assassination of President John F. Kennedy, who was shot in broad daylight as he rode in a motorcade in downtown Dallas, Texas, on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. In the wake of such devastating news, the Nation of Islam sought to distance themselves from Malcolm's statements publicly for fear of the American public's reprisals. However, there were other motives for Malcolm's excommunication. The interview was simply a convenient cover and an appropriate means by which to justify the nation's public chastisement of its leading spokesman. During his 90-day period of isolation, Malcolm was deeply distressed and wrote letters apologizing to Elijah Muhammad, in which he implored the nation to accept him back into its ranks, even if he were to be demoted to a much lower rank and no longer allowed to deliver speeches publicly. However, none of his apologies were accepted, and Malcolm X was rebuffed and severely reprimanded by other higher-ranking members and aspiring spokesmen from within the organization. Close friends and associates of Malcolm, who remained loyal to him, then began to tip him off about assassination plots and many threats of violence that were being planned by certain people within the nation. The United States Secret Service agencies, who were well informed about these threats to Malcolm's life, remained silent and would later be complicit in the agenda to eliminate Malcolm X for good. Consequently, Malcolm X received visitations from the FBI, who sought to exploit his estrangement from the Nation of Islam, but Malcolm X remained fiercely loyal to Elijah Muhammad and refused to cooperate with the secret services, despite having an opportunity to extract revenge and secure a shield of security from the secret services.
Morning, how do you do? With the FBI, you have a couple minutes while I'm talking?
No, a couple. Thank you. Your name is
Beckwith?
Beckwith,
Right.
and yours is
Fulton.
Fulton.
Right.
From which
New York.
New York? There's
There's only one.
only one here.
It's probably what you assumed we came for, to obtain any information you wanted to give us about the Muslims.
I don't assume anything.
No, that's a very general statement on my part, but as you know, we follow the activities of the Muslims as best we can. But we're always looking for new avenues of information, and who better than than the head of the Muslims. At least up to a month ago or something like that.
You're wondering how's your suspension status?
No one knows but Mr. Muhammad. You have to ask him.
You're still in the status as of now. I mean, you're not working now or teaching now at all.
Well, I'm still under the suspension.
That's what I
That's a temporary thing, as far as we know.
He's the only one who can give out any information on that.
Yeah.
I couldn't say anything beyond what he has said.
Yeah, and I think he has said that it's a temporary suspension. I'll be frank with you, one of the reasons we picked this particular time to contact you is because of this suspension.
The suspension was brought about by my own doing.
Yeah, exactly. But who knows what was in your mind when you did receive the suspension. In other words, bitterness could have entered into it. It would not be illogical for someone to have spent so many years doing something and then be suspended.
No, it should make him stronger because it makes him realize that law applies to the law enforcer as well as those who are under the enforcement of the enforcer.
Well, you've taken nearly a perfect attitude toward the thing, which is almost unhuman, really. I mean, you've taken the attitude that Mr. Muhammad wants everyone to take if he chastises them. Which is fine. I mean, more power to you. But you see from our viewpoint that there's at least a chance, and this has happened with other members of the organization, they're suspended for some reason or other. And we talk to them, and they tell us, damn people out there, you know, and they're, of course, cooperative. Why? Of course, they're bitter. Now, assuming you resume your duties, we would be, as you should know, interested in having you help us out.
Help you out to do what? We're always helping out the government. We're cleaning up all of the crimes that we help it out more than it helps itself. We're at least able to reform the people who have been made criminals by this society, by the corruption of this society. And any way to help it out other than that, I wouldn't even know how to begin.
Well, what we're interested in, basically, are the people who belong, the names, the members, and the teachings, plans, the programs.
We're coming down to
the knowledge.
And
I don't think you find anybody more than us.
program. So you've heard a video on Malcolm X. You don't have to agree with everything that Malcolm did or said. Malcolm didn't agree with everything he said. Malcolm evolved, changed, he grew. Other people have grown. A lot of wonderful things that honestly has been done by the Nation of Islam. They had liberal law societies that tried to condemn the one that inherited the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan. But my thought is that in spite of history and all things that they've done, I'll be quite honest with you, I think Louis Farrakhan will go down as one of the greatest leaders this country has ever had, along with King, along with Malcolm and other people. But we're going to appreciate what is now, then we have to look back at what happened earlier. I think one of the great things that has come out of the Nation of Islam, it was the Million Man March, in which over 2 million Black men marched to DC. I don't know who, other than Farrakhan, was able to put together a march that gave hope to a lot of young Black men. I wish we had followed up on it more. There was another march, a memorial march, but I think we have to do something about proving our own situation. There's too much crime that exists within our own community, and we can't blame that on society, white men, or corrupt police. The addicts, thievery, these kind of things. We have had to have some kind of perspective. We have to have some leadership that condemn this kind of thing. The church is one area that sets forth a moral compass and has done a good job in many senses to, shall we say, improve our community. I feel think very highly of some religious organizations, and I don't always agree with their theology. We don't have to agree. But in order to move forward, I think we have to have some degree of unity amongst us. And unity doesn't mean sameness. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything, but it means we come together based on those things that we do have in common, and we try to move forward. we know that there's certain things that we need to have in order to move forward in a society. We need to be able to take care of ourselves. That's why I strongly support business development, because if you're going to be able to feed your folks, you have to have some means of developing an income. I think that's important, extremely important. And those of us who advocate that they love for business, and yet they don't purchase anything from them, they don't work with them, then you're a liar and the truth is not in. You don't really believe in it. You're just looking out for yourself. We have got to have and support small businesses, whether they, and particularly our own, but also small businesses who are not our own. We got to support business. It's a whole philosophical approach to one thing. We've got to support education, because if you don't have the tools to be a doctor, if you don't have the mental tools and the teachings to be a teacher, to be a preacher, or to be anything, education is extremely important. And there's different forms of education. There's formal education you get in the classroom. And it's also the kind of education, just reading, studying, absorbing knowledge, absorbing information is critically important. And there's an old song, and I repeat it, all we are saying is give peace a chance. We cannot advocate war and violence and expect our young people to be nonviolent. Why is it in order to settle disputes and differences that we have to destroy each other? We don't have to destroy. We don't have to fight. The only thing that I support is a person ending themselves and their family. But go out and attack someone because they differ with you, it's a terrible, terrible kind of. We have got to learn how to first love ourselves, to think positively about who and what we are, and then learn to love others. One element that has to reach our conscious mind that's extremely important is the element of forgiveness. Forgive those who have trespassed against us. In order to have unity, because no one's going to be perfect. Someone is going to say or do something that's going to offend you at some point. And if you carry that burden with you to the grave, who is it helping? We've got to learn how to forgive. And by the way, I'm still a small businessman. I'm located in at 35 South 8th Street in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I'm still in the business of selling oils and statues, a lot of authentic, original oil paintings, African clothing. God has blessed me with the ability to continue to run this business, but hey, without you, I cannot survive and I cannot thrive. To those who have come and supported my business, I want to let you know that I appreciate your support, because your support allows me to continue on and do positive things for a positive program. My daughter is putting on a play that's going to take place in May, I think May 7th, and there's several dates. I don't know if we have something on that, but she's doing a play. And you can check out African Paradise, my web page, to get information about location, that kind of thing. Trying to do something positive, trying to relate a positive message about this. But Remember unity. Remember love. Remember coming together as a people. I share with you Malcolm's story, not for you to embrace everything that Malcolm did or said, but for you to take a look at his growth as a human being, his growth in terms of moving from a position of separation to human rights, that everybody has a right to live. Everybody has a right to have a positive journey. So I want to say to you, thank you so much, Chris. And I've been looking at some of the other shows that on 17104, and they're doing a wonderful job here. And thank God that this station exists, and we need you to support this station, support this program. And we're going to continue to do our thing as long as we're on the planet Earth. God bless you and keep you. And may heaven smile upon you. This is your friend and your neighbor, Richard James, sign off, and take care now. We appreciate it. We'll see you and talk to you next week. So long.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. We thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let's hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. And so I'll see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.